Pythagoras believed that there were three types of music. The music we play on instruments, the unheard music that exists inside our bodies, and the music created by the cosmos. Centuries later, in his discovery that the orbits of the planets were elliptical, Johannes Kepler ascribed a musical scale to each planet. And he believed the planets sang a cosmic chorus as they traveled around the sun. The attempts by both Pythagoras and Kepler to find music in nature is ultimately bound by the scientific observation and can be disproven. But what would happen if a composer whose artistic freedom was not bound by the rigor of the scientific method were to attempt to do the opposite, to take something that is not music and make it musical? Now, this idea is not new. Baroque composers wrote music to evoke human affects. Romantic composers wrote programmatic music that told epic tales. But what I am thinking of are the kinds of techniques pioneered by the composer and architect Ioannis Xenakis, who use mathematical formulas to generate music. In a large body of my own compositions, I take a similar approach, creating systems or sets of rules based on concepts borrowed from mathematics, physics, and technology. And I want to start with my first venture into this way of composing music, with a piece that I wrote in 2003 called What Hath God Wrought? Now, this rather ominous title is taken from the first telegraph message that Samuel Morse sent from the US Capitol to Baltimore on May 24th, 1844. And we have no idea why Morse chose to send such an ominous message. But arguably, the invention of the telegraph marks the start of the information age, or at least foreshadows it. For the first time, information could be transmitted from one place to someplace far away simultaneously. And the code that Morse invented is binary, a precursor to the binary systems used by computers over a century later. From a composer's standpoint, Morse code lends itself easily to a translation to music. We simply make a dot a short note value and a dash a longer note value, and we get rhythms. I mean, Morse code is basically the transmission of information by rhythm. And when we convert it, the word what would sound like this. Do, 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 do. A similar approach could be applied to pitch or what notes are played. A dot could be two notes that are close together, a small interval. A dash could be two notes that are further apart, a larger interval. And when these two elements are combined, the words become melodies. For example, the word God, played here by the English horn, bassoon, and electric bass, sounds like this. And the word what, played by the electric guitar, sounds like this. Now what I'm going to do is play a short excerpt of the piece so you can hear these things in action. You're going to hear that God melody played, and it's going to be followed by all of the instruments playing the entire message, what hath God wrought? And they'll be playing in canon, meaning they'll play the same music, but they'll start at different times. This will be followed by all of the instruments playing the word what in canon again, but this time playing the melody at different speeds. This recording is by my group Pulsoptional from our 2007 debut album. Now, this way of composing music, built on systems, really excited me. For one, I created music I could never have conceived of in any other way. But it also allowed me to communicate with an audience. I mean, regardless of whether or not an audience member knows Morse code, it's still possible for them to hear that a message is being transmitted. But my approach was not entirely rigorous, and as a composer, I had great freedom. And ever since writing this piece, I wanted to write a piece that was entirely based on a system, a composition where I could explain every note, every rhythm, every formal choice. I wanted to write the perfect algorithmic composition. And that came several years later with Liber Abbasi for percussion ensemble. And in this piece, I was interested in two concepts, both from mathematics, fractals and the Fibonacci sequence. And I want to start with fractals. A fractal can be defined as a fragmented geometric shape that can be split into smaller parts, each of which are a reduced copy of the whole. And fractals are generated using reiterative processes where the same set of rules are applied to the object again and again. And the creation of the Sierpinski triangle is a great demonstration. To create this triangle, we start with an equilateral triangle. Then we invert it and reduce its size, creating now 3 new equilateral triangles. And we could do the same thing to each of those triangles to leave us with 9 triangles. And we could repeat this process again and again on each new triangle. And eventually we're going to be left with smaller units that are just miniature replicas of the larger unit. And I thought, what would it be like to have a piece of music that was just like this triangle and had the same relationships? The large triangle would be the overall composition, smaller triangles would be smaller sections, and the smallest triangles would be the individual notes. The second aspect that I was interested in is the Fibonacci sequence. And this sequence was first presented by Leonardo of Pisa, better known as Fibonacci, in his 12,002 book, Liber Abbasi, or Book of Calculation. And it appears on one small page of this rather large tome, where Fibonacci is describing the reproduction of rabbits. And Fibonacci set up the following rules. It takes 1 month for a bunny to grow to a mature rabbit, and each month, a mature rabbit will produce 1 offspring. So, if we follow Fibonacci, the first month we have a bunny. In the second month, that bunny grows into a mature rabbit. In the third month, that rabbit creates a new offspring, and now we have 2 rabbits. In the fourth month, the first rabbit creates another offspring, and the bunny matures. And we can continue it. In month 5, there are going to be 5 rabbits. In month 6, there will be 8. In month 7, there will be 13. And we can continue this process to infinity. By the time we reach 14, our rabbit population has grown to 610. There's another way that we can make the Fibonacci sequence, and that's using a mathematical formula, where we start with 0 and 1, and each new number is a sum of the previous 2. So starting with 0 and 1, the next number is going to be 1, which is 1 plus 0. The next number will be 2, which is 1 plus 1. Then 3, which is 1 plus 2. 5, which is 2 plus 3. 8, 3 plus 5, and continues. What makes the Fibonacci sequence so fascinating is that as the numbers increase, the same ratio appears between adjacent numbers. Let's look at the last 3. Notice that the ratio between 233 and 377 is 0.618, and the ratio between 377 and 610 is also 0.618. Now, this ratio has been given several names: the golden ratio, the golden section, the golden mean, and it's fascinated mathematicians since Euclid. It appears regularly in nature, in the layout of the seeds of a sunflower, and also in the ratio between the chambers of a nautilus shell. And the attraction to the golden ratio is the belief that we as humans find it aesthetically pleasing. Architects have used it in their design, most notably Le Corbusier in the mid-20th century. Artists have used it in their paintings, but composers have used it extensively. Bela Bartok, Claude Debussy, Michael Gandolfi, William Duckworth, just to name a few. And when an architect uses it, they might use it to determine the size of windows in a building or the size of the balconies, as shown here. An artist may use it to place an object perfectly within a canvas. But composers use it for time, or how long a section of music will be in relation to the whole. Young composers are taught using Bela Bartok's music for strings, percussion, and celeste as a model, that if they place the climax of their composition right at the golden ratio, right at 61.8% of the way through the piece, it's guaranteed to be successful. But I thought, why stop there? Why not have it between all the sections of the piece, between all of the musical phrases, and between every note? And I started visually with what we call Fibonacci tiling. And to do this, we start with a tile that is 1 by 1. It's rather small here, but it will get bigger. Then another 1 by 1 square, Then we do a 2x2 square, a 3x3 square, a 5x5, 8x8, 13x13, and we can continue it. Now, if we inscribe an arc in between each of these squares, we get what is known as the Fibonacci spiral, which you can see closely resembles the shape of the Nautilus shell. And I thought, what would it be like to write a piece of music where the experience of hearing it would be like traveling through the chambers of the Nautilus shell, hearing the same music again and again at smaller and smaller intervals, but still maintaining that same relationship. But music works linearly in time, so we have to lay the squares out in a row. And if you recall what we talked about with fractals, where we created the Sierpinski triangle using the same process again, we can do this with the squares, reducing each square to its sum. So a 34 square would become a 13 and a 21 square would become an 8 and a 13, and it would continue. And then we continue this process again and again, reducing each square to a smaller unit until we're left with the smallest unit, which is a single 1x1 square. And the next step is to remove the scaffolding, replace the squares with note heads, add stems and beams, add a musical staff, and we have music. Now, if we assign each one of these notes to a drum from high to low, the result is going to sound like this. Now, when I got to this point, I was both excited and disappointed. Excited that I'd made this happen, but disappointed in the way it sounded. And I knew that I couldn't make a performer do this for 10 minutes or more, and I definitely couldn't make an audience member listen to more than 10 minutes of this. But if the similar approach were applied to other aspects of music, what pitches are played, what register they are, how high or low those pitches are, in orchestration, what instruments are playing, the result is much more enjoyable. And now, before I play you a short segment of this piece, I want to talk briefly about the form, or how it's constructed. It starts by counting 16th notes, which are the smallest note value. And it starts, that X should actually be a 16th note, but that's okay. And it starts at 610 and counts its way down to 1, then 377 all the way down to 1, 233 down to 1, until we're left at 1. And then the process repeats again, starting at 377 and working all the way down to 1. And then for each new number after that, until we're left at the very end with just one note. And what I'm going to do is play a short segment from 233 to where it resets at 377. This recording is by the Truman State University Percussion Ensemble, directed by Michael Bump, the group that premiered the work. And what you're going to see as it plays is a video that will count down the numbers for you. It took me over a year to compose Liber Bassi, and it was a laborious process. It also completely fulfilled any desire I had to write such formalized music, and I will never do it again. And as a colleague of mine mentioned once, in many ways, Liber Bassi is more of an experiment than actual music. And like many experiments, I went into it with certain expectations, but left it with completely unexpected results. Composing is a lot like learning to play a new technique on a musical instrument. The musician spends hours, days, weeks, months carefully practicing the technique again and again until it becomes intuitive. And similarly, the methodic approach to composing Liber Bassi, where the focus wasn't on the notes, but how, and especially when they were presented, left me with a more intuitive understanding of how time works in music, and how I, as a composer, can use time for dramatic effects. So this has drastically changed all of my work since then, both in my own compositions, but most importantly, is my work as an educator training young musical composers. Thank you so much.